welcome. Hello to everybody who is bothering to watch this video. I should put out a disclaimer. I wasn't going to do this video originally or use this footage. This is pretty much the remainder of my footage from my trip in August to the Gap as well as my hometown and Atlanta. So we're going to do a little bit of night driving in my hometown. I was visiting friends and family there, so part of the reason I didn't want to do this video initially was because the sound quality and the video quality is kind of, I won't say awful, but subpar compared to what my expectations were going in. As you can hear, there's a lot of rattling from the GoPro that's mounted on my windshield. I mentioned in a previous video, this is like an old GoPro, and if you can hear the rattling, it's a little bit annoying, but I'll try not to pay that much attention to it or direct your attention to it. It's just rattling within the case that's being held by the mount. So you might have to put up with it this entire video. And my principle in the matter is that I had this content footage. I don't care that it's subpar quality, but I do kind of want to use it just to say, you know, that I've used it. I'm only in the beginning phases of doing these videos and making content, so I figured, why not? The other thing you may notice is that I've decided to camp out here on the right side of the screen as opposed to the left like in my previous driving videos. A lot of that just depends on what the angle of the camera is and what it's showing. And as I was watching or rewatching the footage from here, I noticed that the camera's panned slightly toward the right. So more of the road and more of the scenery that you see here is off to the left. So I'm going to take up as little space as possible. So the screen feels, I guess, somewhat balanced. Let's just say that. So I don't really have that much to rant about as far as news is concerned. This isn't like a news video like my previous driving video was when I was driving through the Atlanta area. Like I said, this is night footage of my hometown. I think it was like the last night that I was there before I drove back to Texas the next day. So I figured I'd just, you know, put it out there and use it as kind of background to banter a bit, rant, quip, whatever word that you want to use. So let's talk about a few things. What is everybody excited about? I can tell you one thing that I'm excited about is the new Phase generation that's going to come out in, I guess, a week on the 25th, which is next Saturday. They're calling it, was it Phase Saga? And I haven't dove deeply into all the characters yet. I think, there's 5 of them. And there's lots of speculation going on about, like, who might they be, who their previous personas were somewhere in, like, the VTubing industry or VTubing world. But we really won't know until we see them in action, hear their voices, see how they act on the YouTube screen, if you want to call it that. So I'm excited about that, but that's pretty much all I have to say. I guess I'll dedicate part of my Saturday next week to doing that. So I've got 30 minutes of footage on this video, so I need to figure out, you know, 30 minutes worth of things to talk about. So why don't we talk about, you know, the content of this video here? And so I went out for a night drive in my hometown, as you can see here. Now, there are certain routes I like to take when I'm bored and, you know, I don't want to go back to, you know, where I'm going immediately after, you know, leaving a friend's house or a store or a restaurant or place I'm going to. So if you've seen some of my previous driving videos that I made comments or subtitles with my 2D avatar, this is the same place. It's Huntsville, Alabama. If you don't know where that is, you can always look it up on a map. It's most famous for I guess being where the space program had its brains and arguably still has its brains. As you can see off to the right is the world's only upright replica of the Saturn V rocket, which sent um, humanity to the moon. It's part of a museum that you should visit if you ever get a chance. Highly recommend. And I think it's the biggest tourist attraction in the state of Alabama, if I'm not mistaken, but don't quote me on that. Just look it up. I could be totally right. I could be totally wrong. I only remember that from years ago. The one thing I don't like about the video quality here on the GoPro, besides, the rattling that you see, and that's more of an audio quality thing of it rattling in the case, is I don't think I used the proper night settings. So it's a little bit grainier than I'd like it to be. And also the focus on the lights, the street lights that you see here kind of detract from where it should be. And I feel like my audio settings are also off because the window capture is very loud. So I'm going to reduce the volume there. So hopefully you can hear me better. And I'm totally not editing this video. So if you didn't hear a word I said until now, well, that's the way it's going to be, unfortunately. This is a very long red light, and it just finally changed. Yes, drown out that musical noise. Thank you. Turn it down a little bit more, maybe. Yeah, I had written down a small list of things to talk about. So speaking of things, is it me or in the past 2 or 3 years there has been a huge nostalgia kick everywhere on social media, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Twitter/X, whether it's on Instagram. It's like Zoomers especially seem to be longing for shit that they're not even old enough to remember. And that's not like an insult toward that generation or anything like that. I grew up in the 1990s and the 2000s, so being an older millennial, I kind of experienced a lot of the things that Zoomers kind of, I don't necessarily dream about, but the old saying that some people just long for an era that they don't even remember or knew existed. But I feel like that's what's happening with YouTube. Maybe it's because, I'm into car culture as a hobby, but nerd hobbies in general are getting like that. You've heard the controversy about Microsoft pulling support for Windows 10 as of a few days ago, and Windows 10 isn't even that old of an operating system. I think it's only been somewhat popular since really the late 2010s, early 2020s, right around the time of COVID. So it hasn't had a very long life cycle for it to just, for support to suddenly be pulled. And people were complaining about Windows 10 coming out when, Windows 7 was perfectly fine. And I used 7 for a long time. And that's saying something considering that I used Vista for at least one or two computers/laptops I had. And Vista was a very controversial operating system. A lot of people see 7 as the operating system that kind of corrected a lot of the stuff that was shortcomings with Vista, I guess. But on all of the computers that I used Vista on, I never had any issues with them. And, after watching a lot of videos and reading up on a lot of research about that, I knew Vista had problems at the time. But I never personally experienced them. And I think the general consensus is if you bought a PC that came with Vista as like the natively installed operating system, you didn't have those issues. But if you were upgrading Vista from an XP machine, then you had the issues because Vista had a lot of requirements that most PCs at the time, back in the mid 2000s, I think it came out in 2006 or 2007, they didn't have the recommended specs to run Vista properly. I won't say flawlessly, but properly, where you weren't getting like freezes or I guess that era equivalent of BSODs all the time. A BSOD means, for those of you who don't know, blue screen of death. So, which was very common when you were running Windows ME or a lot of the late 90s Windows operating systems, which is when I got into, technology and PCs for the first time. So, yeah, I do remember the 95, 98 slash 2K Pro era, and I was one of the 2K Pro users. But yeah, back to, and I segued a bit too much, but back to the whole thing about upgrading to Windows 11. I don't like what's going on with them saying that the default is you're going to have to upload everything to the cloud. No on-premise solutions anymore or something, because that's been the trend for the past several years now, everywhere with uploading to the cloud, and you don't own your data. And that's a big deal for a lot of people who are like Gen Xers and older millennials who, when, we got into computers and tech, we did that before like the internet and broadband and fiber became popular. So we're kind of we remember the era of when we had to install our own games on our PCs and whatnot, but we owned that data. We remember physical media with like DVD, Blu-rays, CDs, and whatnot. And I've been on a physical media kick in the past 2 or 3 years. I've been buying CDs, DVDs, and Blu-rays of a lot of shows and a lot of musical artists that I used to listen to back in the day, and even new ones as well. I mean, um, you know, I'm fortunate enough. I live near Kinokuniya bookstore, and the one near me sells newly released CDs, and half of the releases are of OSTs and music from anime and video games that were released, 10, 20, 30 years ago, which kind of goes to show how it's becoming popular again. Back in the 2000s, it's kind of the equivalent of when vinyl sales started increasing again, even though, vinyl hadn't been a medium of choice since really the 1970s, when 8 tracks and I guess cassettes started taking over, and then CDs after that back in the late 90s and back in the late 80s and early 90s. CDs were the medium of choice back in the 90s and the 2000s for music. But yeah, I've been collecting media again, and everywhere I go, well, not everywhere I go, but more frequently when I've been out, I've been taking, a few CDs with me and playing them in my cars via this portable CD player I got off Amazon that has Bluetooth capability. So, um, I should mention the reason I use that is because I do have a CD player in my NA Miata, my 96M edition. It feeds and ejects CDs just fine, but it doesn't read them. So when I insert a CD, I'll just pop it back out 10 seconds later. And I think it's probably because maybe the laser's bad or something internally needs to be fixed with that head unit. But I haven't bothered replacing it because the head unit as a whole, except for the CD player being able to read CDs, it works pretty much perfectly like it did when the car was new. It even has a button where, I can toggle the headrest speakers on and off, and it's designed for when the top goes down or the top comes up. And I always have it to where music is playing through my headrest speakers because it just sounds better that way. It has all kinds of other controls as well, and for the most part, it works pretty flawlessly. The cassette player in it still works, and I have a tape deck adapter, so I could plug my CD player into that with a tape adapter and listen to CDs directly that way rather than through an FM transmitter. And that's what I usually like to do. But I segued again. So talking about Windows 11, yes, the trend toward putting everything on the cloud and giving your data to third parties where you don't actually own anything, that's kind of a little bit, you know, worrying. I kind of like to possess things, so I like owning my own data and not subjecting it to the whims or controls of other human beings or even like acts of nature. Like there was some news about what was it, the government in South Korea lost like 800 terabytes of data because they put all that on the cloud and it was all in just one data center that caught fire. And now people in the country can't be issued driver's licenses or passports or any other documents that the government had because they just uploaded electronically to a cloud. Well, if you're at least going to do that, I mean, put it in different places. You know, don't have all your eggs in one basket. But I guess that's a lesson learned a little bit too late. Oh well. What else is on my list? I wound up covering a bit of news, like that whole thing about the data center burning down. So it seems it's inescapable. How about that? But back on my kick, my rant about nostalgia, I think it's just because of the hobbies we're in and people are rebelling against the current popular culture, which seems kind of maybe NPC-ish in nature, whether it's music, movies, television, or I guess what you see in streaming services now. So they want the old stuff. Cars are like that too. I mean, you look at modern cars with all their touch screens and everything, and I'm not a fan. That's all I can say. I mean, I've I've ridden in a Tesla before. I've ridden in a couple of them. I haven't driven one, but you want to know something? I do get the appeal for normies because I can kind of think in those shoes a bit, and I see all the features. I see all like the touch screens and everything, and they're like, well, that's cool. I see all the cars in real time as like, you know, little icons or almost playable characters on a computer screen or something. And I got to think, you know what, strategy gamers definitely designed all of Tesla's internal, you know, monitoring features and everything. Oh, that's a huge red light violation there. Nothing will happen to them though. But yeah, as I was saying, you know, I get the appeal. It's not for me personally, though. I don't mind having like the latest technology or little technology to play music or that sort of thing, but when you put everything through a centralized touchscreen, that touchscreen breaks. I mean, aren't you bricked? You can't drive your car or anything like that. I like having as many things analog as possible because it's just, you know, more reliability for me at least. That's the way I see things, and I can fix a lot of my own things. Or if I can't fix them myself, I know people who can. And it's that way with cars. And I'll say this about like both cars I own. I own an ND Miata, which you see being driven here, and I own my NA Miata. And yeah, the NA Miata is way more analog than the ND Miata, but just to give you a state of where we are as far as cars go, and this is just one industry, the ND Miata has been out for 10 model years now. I mean, it was released in 2015 for the 2016 model year here in the US, and we're 10 model years in and two facelifts in with the ND3. But the design has largely remained the same, which goes to show you like the timelessness of certain sports car designs, and the ND Miata is going to go down as one of them. I mean, I feel like it's going to be along with the NA Miata. Those are going to be the two generations everybody is going to want 50 years from now. And if you're fortunate enough to live long enough to where you're still alive in 50 years, you know, let me know if that's true. If you know I'm beyond the grave. But but yeah, I mean, what I was going to say about the ND Miata is the ND Miata is the most analog car that you can buy today, I think, at least among enthusiast vehicles. It still stayed true to the formula from the 1990s with the original NA. And that's kind of what I felt when, a few weeks ago I was in the market for a new car and I was comparing buying a new ND versus buying a new BRZ slash GR86. And as great a car as the current generation GR86 and BRZ are, and I think the jury's still out about, how valued they will be in 10, 20, 30 years. The thing that spoke out to me about the current ND is just how how much connection with the road and the environment you feel, whether it's top up or top down, compared to the BRZ, which as great as it is, it felt numb to me compared to the ND. And maybe you might not like hearing that if you're a big, GR86 slash BRZ fan, but that's the way I felt. And it took a few test drives for me to kind of realize that and marinate in my mind, as some people, like to say, they use that term. But so I've decided, my next vehicle purchase, and it might very well be my last new vehicle purchase, is going to be a new NDRF. As some of you may know, my ND is a soft top, and I drove in the very first ND Miata that I actually test drove was an RF, and this was years ago when I lived in Georgia, before I moved to where I am now. And I hadn't driven an RF since then until a few weeks ago. And the RF driving dynamics are noticeably different from the soft top, especially when you're going around corners. And I imagined myself, driving an ND RF around, um, Miatas at the Gap, at Tail of the Dragon, Charles Skyway, some of those others. And I have to say, as fun as they were, driving in my ND soft top, next year I want to do it in an RF. I think it would just be absolutely phenomenal, and I'm so looking forward to that. I am so looking forward to that. And I'm going to make that trip year after year. I'm going to make it a regular thing. See, I'm going through my list here. So, going on about, like, segueing a little bit from nostalgia, but and cars, but kind of in the same vein. As I mentioned, I'm in my hometown. I come back here maybe 3, 4 times a year whenever I can. Sometimes I fly, sometimes I drive. I always like driving. I don't like the fact that the drive is about 12, 13 hours each way. But when I get here, the fact that I'm in my own vehicle, provides me a sense of, like, comfort that I've accomplished something even when I've returned home. But but here's the thing. So I'm in my hometown now. I'm driving all past all these places, these neighborhoods that I remember, that, I still know a few people who live in there. And, memories kind of come back to me of being in certain friends' houses, playing video games till like 1, 2 in the morning. And all the fun activities I did as a kid and as a teenager and as a young adult. And at the same time, I can't say I really miss those. I mean, fun as they were, I think there's a theme about, visiting your hometown after you've moved away and have been outside for so long. It's that you can never really return. And it's figuratively in a way, not literally. I'm literally returning 2, 3 times a year, but you can never really return back to those times, those eras. They're memories. They're not your current life. So it goes without saying, I guess, what I think the proper way to say it is you can never really go home. You have to keep moving forward in life if you want to get anywhere and be fulfilled. And I think that's one of the defining human characteristics of certain people. I feel like those who are obsessed with just one place and with home are kind of stuck, figuratively and literally. They're stuck in the same place with the same ideas. They don't go out. They don't explore the larger world, not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally. And that kind of segues into my next train of thought, which is I need a drink. I need to get a drink. I've had 3 cups of coffee this morning, and now I'm downing it with a Coke chaser. As a friend with a capital F has recommended that I do, and I love this combo. You drink a cup of coffee and then you down it with a Coke chaser. You should try it sometime. Okay, my throat is clearer now. What was I saying? I've got 7 minutes left of video footage, so okay. Back to what I was saying about, you can never really return. It goes without saying that you have to kind of move forward in whatever you're doing. You have to learn new things, seek out new experiences if you want to have a fulfilling life. And that's kind of like my philosophy. Not to say that stability, staying in the same place, knowing the same people is necessarily a bad thing. 80-90% of humanity like live that way. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But there's always those people that want to get out and do new things, seek out new experiences and whatnot. And I think I've always been one of those people. And I've only realized that about myself in retrospect over the past 5, 10, 15 years as I've lived in different places and I've moved around, taken different jobs and whatnot. You have to try new things. And I'm always up for trying new things. It can be scary at first, but I think what the biggest thing you can overcome is your fear of failure. Because failure itself is not a bad thing, it's always something to learn from. And even if you fail 10 times, it's all about succeeding in that one thing that, makes you happy and makes other people happy. Because if you succeed in one thing, those 10 failures don't matter. In fact, sometimes it takes 10 failures to get that one success that can change your life, that can change other people's lives, that can change the whole world. For me personally, you might ask, well, how did I get into this whole thing of content creation, VTubing, whatnot? It's because, well, I've seen other people do it and I want to try it for myself. And so earlier this year, I came up with the idea and I put things in motion into fruition and, look where I am now. Look where we are now. You by virtue of watching this video. One thing I like to do, and this goes without saying, I think a lot of people who are into content creation do this, is that they write down a lot of ideas. Because I'm one of those people, if I don't write something down, there's a chance I'll forget it. And I come up with all these ideas and I always write them down on a piece of paper. So yeah, I'm one of those people. I abuse notepads and post-it notes like you wouldn't believe, and I write things down with an ink pen. And so I have like 4 or 5 post-it notes of content ideas that cover at least a couple of dozen topics, and they range from being very general to being being, very specific. And so these driving videos were just one of those topics. And they may not be, in the original form that I wrote them down, but ideas can change, ideas can be modified. And so that's what's happening here. That's the result of these. And it's the reason I'm doing this video despite, the original video content quality. It's because it's a platform and it's a medium for ranting and talking about things. So that's 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 the result of this, really. So another thing I wanted to talk about, and this is probably the last subject matter of this video, is, and I've received some questions about this from people who don't personally know me, is how did I get into Miatas and how did I get into cars in general? Well, I think that's a subject for another video where I'll go into a lot more detail about it, about the history of your favorite Miata VTuber. But to sum it up, I have always been tangentially into cars. Before I got into Miatas, I was kind of a Honda boy. The very first car I personally owned was a 2000 Accord. And yeah, it was an automatic, even though I learned on a manual on my dad's Toyota T100 pickup truck back in the late 90s. But every car I've owned since then has been a manual. I owned an Acura RSX, I owned a Honda Fit, and then I owned a Honda Civic Si 9th Gen 2013, which those are going to be sought after real soon because they're the last true, I think, K series motor that was naturally aspirated in any kind of Honda sports car or enthusiast vehicle. So I think people are going to want those. Um, but how I got into Miatas? Well, I drove one uh, with a friend of mine here in Texas, and I kind of liked it. I liked that I was driving what felt like a go-kart. And then I started test driving them, when I was living in Georgia at the time after a trip to Texas. And, eventually with a move out here, I got my own, and I figured I'd wind up getting an ND because I didn't have a lot of money saved up at the time. I was going to have to finance a vehicle if I was going to get one. And yeah, my very first Miata that I bought was off the deep end. I bought not a new, but a certified pre-owned ND, and that's what you see me driving here. And since then, I've also bought and owned 5 different NAs. And my depth of knowledge with NAs is pretty deep as a result. I've owned everything from pristine condition vehicles like my 96M edition, which is one of my forever cars. And the one I'd been sought after for, I'd sought after for a couple of years before I got it. And I've owned shitbox NAs with rebuilt titles as well. So, but yeah, Miatas are just a thing I'm into now. So, and will be for the foreseeable future. That's going to wrap it up for this video. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Until next time, see ya.